They say every murder leaves behind three things: a victim, a killer, and a secret. But sometimes the secret is harder to find than the killer. I'm Detective Ethan Cross, and this is another case from my files. Listen carefully. Every clue matters. Every suspect has a story. And before this episode ends, one truth will change everything. Welcome to Murder Mystery Crime Podcast.
Case number 3. The cruise ship murder. A luxury cruise sets sail for a 7-day voyage through the Caribbean. On the second night, billionaire entrepreneur Richard Lawson fails to appear for the captain's gala dinner. When security officers unlock his private suite, they find him dead. The balcony door is locked. The cabin door was electronically sealed from the inside. Nothing appears to have been stolen, and the ship is hundreds of miles from land. No one could have escaped. Detective Ethan Cross is flown by helicopter to meet the ship when it returns to port, and begins interviewing everyone who had access to the victim during the voyage. 6 suspects quickly emerge: the ex-wife who was about to lose a multi-million-dollar settlement, the business rival whose company had just lost a billion-dollar contract, the personal assistant who knew every secret Richard kept, the ship's doctor who examined Richard just hours before his death, the casino manager who argued with Richard after an explosive confrontation, the mysterious passenger who boarded the cruise using a false identity. Each suspect claims they were nowhere near the suite. Each has an alibi. Each tells a story that almost fits, until Detective Cross discovers the ship's timeline contains a missing 15 minutes no one can explain. As every interview uncovers another motive, another lie, and another hidden connection, Cross begins to suspect the killer didn't board the ship looking for Richard Lawson. Instead, Richard Lawson may have unknowingly invited danger aboard himself. Was it murder? A carefully planned accident? Or is the truth hidden somewhere beneath the endless ocean? Every passenger is a suspect. Every deck hides another secret. And on a ship with nowhere to run, the truth has nowhere to hide. Chapter 2. The Ex-Wife. The cruise ship had been back in port for less than 12 hours when Detective Ethan Cross boarded. Most passengers had already gone home. A handful remained, waiting to be interviewed. His first stop was Suite 417. Victoria Lawson, Richard Lawson's ex-wife. She opened the door before Cross knocked. "I suppose everyone thinks I killed him." Cross answered calmly, "I don't think anything yet." Victoria stepped aside. The suite overlooked the harbor. Packed luggage sat near the door. She hadn't left. Cross opened his notebook. "You and Richard were divorced 2 years. 2 difficult years. You still spoke?" "Only when lawyers made us." Officer Mills activated the recorder. "Witnesses reported a confrontation between you and Richard the night before he died." Victoria sighed. "It wasn't just a confrontation." "What was it?" "A fight." Cross looked up. "Tell me." Victoria walked to the balcony window. "He confronted me outside the casino." "About what?" "Money." She laughed bitterly. "He wanted to change our divorce agreement." Cross asked, "How did you respond?" "I told him he couldn't rewrite the past." "And then?" "He grabbed my wrist." Cross's expression changed. "He grabbed you?" Victoria nodded. "He wouldn't let go." Officer Mills glanced at a photograph taken the night of embarkation. A faint bruise was visible on Victoria's wrist. "What happened next?" Victoria turned. "I shoved him away. And?" "He shoved me back." Passengers nearby stopped to watch. Richard shouted that I was trying to ruin him. Cross remained silent. Victoria continued. "I slapped him. He lunged toward me again. Before he reached me, 2 security officers stepped between us." Officer Mills wrote quickly. "So the fight was witnessed by dozens of people." Cross asked quietly, "What did Richard say before security separated you?" Victoria looked directly at him. He said, "Before this cruise is over, everything changes." Silence filled the room. Cross made another note. "Were those the last words he spoke to you?" "No." "What were?" Victoria hesitated. "He called me that evening." "What did he want?" "He apologized." Cross looked surprised. "He apologized?" "He said he wanted to meet privately the next day." "Did you?" Victoria slowly shook her head. He never got the chance. Cross closed his notebook. One public fight, hundreds of witnesses, a visible injury, a clear motive. Everything pointed toward Victoria Lawson. But Detective Ethan Cross had solved enough cases to know the suspect who looks guilty first rarely stays that way for long. Chapter 3: The Business Rival. The cruise ship's executive lounge overlooked the ocean. Even tied to the dock, it still felt isolated. Detective Ethan Cross entered to find Damian Cole, Richard Lawson's longtime business rival, waiting with his attorney. Damian stood as Cross approached. "I've been waiting." Cross took a seat. "I hear you and Richard weren't exactly friends." Damian laughed. "Friends? We spent 20 years trying to beat each other." Officer Mills switched on the recorder. "A week before the cruise, Richard's company won a $1 billion contract your company had pursued." Damian nodded. "They did. Were you angry?" "I was furious." Cross looked up. "So furious you boarded the same cruise?" Damian leaned forward. "I didn't board because of Richard. You expect us to believe that? I booked this trip 6 months ago." Cross wrote a note. "Then tell me what happened the night before Richard died." Damian looked toward the windows. "He found me in the casino." "What did he want?" "To gloat." Silence. "He walked right up to my table and congratulated himself for ruining my business." Officer Mills frowned. "What happened next?" Damian smiled bitterly. "I stood up. And I told him to walk away." "Did he?" "No." Cross remained calm. "What did he do?" "He got in my face. So close I could smell the cigar he'd been smoking." Cross waited. "He called me a failure." "And then?" Damian's expression hardened. "I shoved him back." Richard stumbled into a blackjack table. Chips scattered across the floor. Passengers stopped playing. Several stood to watch. Richard charged toward Damian again. The two men collided, grappling as security rushed across the casino. A roulette wheel spun unattended, while chairs scraped across the floor. Security officers pulled them apart, but both men continued shouting across the room. Richard pointed at Damian. "You're finished." Damian answered without hesitation. "You'll never leave this ship with your empire intact." The casino fell silent. Cross looked at Damian. "Those are serious words." They were spoken in anger. "Witnesses say you had to be physically restrained." Damian nodded. "I did." Officer Mills placed a photograph on the table. It showed Damian's torn suit jacket. Another showed a cut above Richard's eyebrow. Cross studied the photos. "So both of you were injured?" "Minor injuries." Cross leaned back. "What happened after security separated you?" Damian sighed. "I went to the upper deck." "Alone?" "Yes." "For how long?" "Nearly an hour." "Can anyone verify that?" Damian hesitated. "I don't know." Cross noticed. "You don't know? Or no one saw you?" Damian didn't answer immediately. Finally he spoke. "I was alone." Silence settled over the lounge. Cross closed his notebook. The fight had been loud, public, humiliating. Hundreds of passengers had witnessed it. Damian Cole had just handed the detectives a powerful motive. But Cross couldn't shake one thought. Every suspect so far had confronted Richard in public. If the killer was one of them, the real plan was probably made somewhere much quieter. Chapter 4: The Personal Assistant. The cruise ship's administration office overlooked the bow. The morning sun reflected off the calm water, but inside the interview room, the atmosphere was anything but peaceful. Detective Ethan Cross sat across from Olivia Pierce, Richard Lawson's personal assistant. She had worked for him for 11 years. She knew his schedule, his passwords, his business meetings, his secrets. Officer Mills switched on the recorder. Cross began. "How long did you work for Richard Lawson?" 11 years. "Did you enjoy working for him?" Olivia smiled without humor. "I respected him." "That's not what I asked." She looked directly at Cross. "No." Silence. Cross made a note. "Tell me about the day Richard died." Olivia folded her hands. "He was nervous." "Nervous about what?" "He wouldn't tell me. But he kept canceling meetings." Cross looked up. "Why?" he said. She paused. "Someone on this ship knows something they shouldn't." Officer Mills immediately wrote down the quote. Cross continued. Did you believe him? At first, no. And later? Olivia nodded slowly. Yes. Cross leaned forward. What changed? He asked me to destroy several business files. Silence. What kind of files? He wouldn't say. Did you destroy them? No. Why not? Because I made copies. Cross looked up sharply. You copied confidential documents? Olivia didn't flinch. I've worked for powerful people long enough to know one rule, which is, always keep proof. Officer Mills exchanged a glance with Cross. What proof? Olivia opened her purse and carefully placed a small encrypted flash drive on the table. Cross stared at it. What's on it? Everything. Contracts, emails, financial records, and recordings of meetings. Cross slowly picked up the drive. Does Richard know you copied these? Olivia shook her head. He didn't. Cross studied her expression. Were you afraid of him? She answered honestly. I was afraid of what he was becoming. Cross wrote another note. Several witnesses reported hearing an argument between you and Richard. Olivia sighed. It wasn't an argument. What was it? A confrontation? Explain. He found out files were missing. And he accused me of stealing company property. What did you say? I told him I wasn't stealing. I was protecting myself. Cross remained silent. Olivia continued. He slammed his briefcase onto the cabin table. He pointed at the door and told me I was fired. Officer Mills asked, How did you react? I laughed. Cross looked up. You laughed? I told him firing me wouldn't erase what I already knew. Silence. What happened next? Olivia hesitated. He walked toward me. So close we were almost nose to nose. Cross waited. He said, If those files ever become public, both of us are finished. The room fell silent. Cross recognized the pattern immediately. Every suspect had heard Richard say something that suggested he was protecting a secret. Not money, not his company. Something much larger. Cross closed his notebook. Where were you between 9 and 10 that night? In my cabin. Can anyone verify that? No. Officer Mills quietly added, Your master access card opened Richard's suite at 8:47 p.m. Olivia froze. It shouldn't have. Cross slid the electronic access log across the table. It did. She stared at the report. I never went inside. Cross leaned back. Then someone used your credentials. Olivia looked genuinely shaken. That's impossible. Cross stood. On a cruise ship, nothing is impossible. As they left the interview room, Mills spoke quietly. 4 suspects, 4 motives, 4 confrontations. Cross nodded, but only one person had access to everything. He looked back at the flash drive sitting in the evidence bag, and that person just handed us the biggest clue we've found so far. Chapter 5. The Ship's Doctor. The medical center was quiet. Outside, passengers were enjoying breakfast on the upper deck. Inside, Detective Ethan Cross sat across from Dr. Elena Vargas, the ship's physician. She had been the last medical professional to examine Richard Lawson alive. Officer Mills switched on the recorder. Cross began. Dr. Vargas, how long have you worked aboard cruise ships? 14 years. And you treated Richard Lawson the day he died? Yes. What was his complaint? Dr. Vargas folded her hands. He said he wasn't feeling well. What symptoms? Chest discomfort, dizziness, shortness of breath. Cross paused. Did you believe he was having a heart attack? I wanted to run more tests. And? He refused. Silence. Why? He insisted he had an important meeting. Cross wrote a note. Did he tell you who he was meeting? No. He only said, she looked down, if I don't handle this tonight, it will follow me forever. Cross exchanged a glance with Officer Mills. Another statement about a secret. Another warning. Cross continued. Did you prescribe anything? Yes. A medication to reduce his blood pressure. Did he take it? I watched him take the first dose. Officer Mills leaned forward. Could that medication have caused his death? Dr. Vargas answered immediately. No. If anything, it may have delayed it. Cross closed the medical file. Witnesses say you and Richard argued after your examination. Dr. Vargas sighed. We did. What happened? I ordered him to remain in the medical center, and he stood up. He pulled the monitoring wires from his chest. He threw them onto the floor. Cross remained calm. What did you do? I stepped in front of the door. He pushed past me. You were pushed? Hard enough that I stumbled into a supply cart. Medical instruments crashed to the floor. A nurse rushed into the room. Richard never looked back. Officer Mills made another note. So there were witnesses. The entire medical staff. Cross asked quietly, what was the last thing Richard said to you? Dr. Vargas didn't hesitate. Tomorrow won't matter if I don't survive tonight. Silence. Cross looked thoughtfully at the medical report. Richard Lawson knew something dangerous awaited him. Whether it was a business deal, a confrontation, or someone he intended to meet. He believed the coming night would decide everything. Cross stood. One last question. Dr. Vargas nodded. If you had been able to keep him here, she answered before he finished. He'd probably still be alive. As Cross and Officer Mills left the medical center, Mills broke the silence. So far, every suspect has fought with him. Cross nodded. Every suspect has heard him talk about some looming event, and every suspect had an opportunity. He looked out across the ocean, but only one of them knew Richard was already in medical danger. And that could make all the difference. Chapter 6. The Mysterious Passenger. The passenger manifest listed the name as Michael Carter, but Detective Ethan Cross already knew that wasn't his real name. The passport used to board the cruise was a forgery. The credit card belonged to someone who had died 3 years earlier. No one knew who the mysterious passenger really was. Cross entered interview room 3. A man in his 40s sat quietly at the table. He showed no fear, only patience. Cross sat down. Your name isn't Michael Carter. The man smiled. No. What is it? I'll tell you when I know why you're asking. Officer Mills switched on the recorder. Cross leaned forward. You met Richard Lawson on this ship. I did. Were you friends? The man laughed. Not even close. Business? No. Family? No. Cross paused. So why were you here? The man's smile disappeared. Because Richard Lawson owed someone. Silence. Who? My father. Cross raised an eyebrow. What did Richard owe him? The truth. Cross opened his notebook. You've been following Richard for years, haven't you? The man nodded. He ruined lives. He destroyed companies. And every time, someone else took the blame. Officer Mills asked, did you confront him? Yes. When? The night he died. Where? On deck 9. Cross looked up. Witnesses reported shouting. They heard correctly. The man folded his arms. Richard thought money solved everything. He offered me a check. Cross asked, what did you do? I tore it in half. And then, he called security. What happened next? The man's eyes narrowed. He grabbed my jacket. I shoved his hand away. Richard swung first. His fist struck the side of the man's face. Passengers gasped. The mysterious passenger answered with a hard shove that sent Richard crashing into a row of deck chairs. Metal chairs clattered across the deck. People scrambled out of the way. Richard jumped back to his feet. The two men grappled near the ship's railing before security officers rushed between them. Even separated, they continued shouting. Richard pointed at the man. You'll never get what you're after. The man shouted back, I'm not leaving until everyone knows what you did. The crowd stood frozen. Some recorded the confrontation on their phones. Others hurried away. Security escorted both men in opposite directions. Back in the interview room, Cross broke the silence. That's the third public fight Richard had on this cruise. The man nodded. He made enemies everywhere he went. Cross looked directly at him. Did you kill him? No. Did you go to his suite later that night? No. Officer Mills placed a security report on the table. Your keycard was detected near Richard's deck at 10:42 t.m. The man's expression changed. I was looking for him. Why? To finish our conversation. Did you? He slowly shook his head. When I reached his suite, the door was already closed. Did you hear anything? The man thought for a moment. Yes. What? A woman's voice. Cross immediately looked at Officer Mills. A woman's voice? The man nodded. I couldn't hear every word, but I clearly heard her say, you should have told me years ago. The room fell silent. Cross stood. Every suspect had uncovered another piece of Richard Lawson's past. Every confrontation pointed to an old secret. And now, for the first time, someone had placed an unidentified woman outside Richard's suite just before his death. The list of suspects had just grown, and Detective Ethan Cross wasn't convinced they had met the real killer yet. Chapter 7. The Casino Manager. The ship's casino had reopened after investigators finished processing the scene. Slot machines chimed, cards shuffled, passengers tried to forget that, just one deck above them, a man had died. Detective Ethan Cross walked into the casino office. Waiting for him was Anthony Russo, the casino manager. He looked exhausted. Officer Mills switched on the recorder. Cross took a seat. "You've managed casinos for a long time." Anthony nodded. "Nearly 20 years. You knew Richard Lawson before this cruise?" "I'd met him several times." "Were you friends?" Anthony laughed. "Richard didn't have friends. He had people he needed." Silence. Cross made a note. "Witnesses say the two of you argued shortly before Richard died." Anthony sighed. "That's putting it mildly. What happened?" Anthony leaned back. "Richard accused the casino of cheating." Officer Mills frowned. "Was it?" "No. He simply couldn't accept losing." Cross continued. "What happened next?" "He demanded surveillance footage." "And?" "I refused." "Why?" "Company policy." Anthony shook his head. "He slammed both hands onto my desk. The chips scattered everywhere. He called me a thief." Cross looked up. "And then?" Anthony's jaw tightened. "I stood up." Richard shoved the office chair backward. Anthony shoved him away from the desk. Richard grabbed Anthony by the front of his jacket. The two men crashed into a shelf filled with gaming equipment. Boxes fell to the floor. A glass trophy shattered. Security officers rushed into the office as passengers gathered outside the open door. Even after being separated, Richard continued yelling. He pointed toward Anthony. "You'll regret embarrassing me." Anthony fired back. "You walked into this casino with secrets, Richard. Don't blame me because they're catching up with you." The room fell silent. Cross looked at Anthony. "What did you mean by that?" Anthony hesitated. "I'd heard rumors." "What rumors?" "That Richard wasn't on this cruise for a vacation." Cross leaned forward. "Then why was he here?" Anthony answered quietly. "To meet someone." "Who?" "I don't know, but he seemed terrified that person would expose him." Officer Mills asked, "Did Richard gamble after your fight?" Anthony nodded. "For nearly an hour." "How did you do?" Anthony smiled faintly. "He lost every hand." Cross frowned. "Richard Lawson wasn't known for losing." Anthony nodded. "He wasn't paying attention. He kept looking toward the casino entrance." "As if," Cross finished the sentence. "He was waiting for someone." Anthony nodded. "Exactly." Cross stood and closed his notebook. 7 interviews, 7 confrontations, 7 different stories, yet every one of them pointed to the same conclusion. Richard Lawson hadn't boarded the cruise to relax. He had boarded expecting a meeting he clearly feared. As Cross and Officer Mills walked toward the elevator, Mills spoke quietly. "Everyone says Richard was waiting for someone." Cross nodded. "And now we know something else." "What?" "He wasn't trying to avoid that meeting. The elevator doors opened. He made sure it happened." For the first time in the investigation, Detective Ethan Cross believed Richard Lawson had knowingly sailed into the most dangerous appointment of his life. Chapter 8. The Reconstruction. The cruise ship remained docked under police guard. Every suspect had been interviewed. Every confrontation had been documented. Yet Detective Ethan Cross still couldn't answer the most important question. Who entered Richard Lawson's suite? Cross gathered everyone in the ship's theater. Rows of empty seats surrounded the suspects. Victoria Lawson, Damian Cole, Olivia Pierce, Dr. Elena Vargas, Anthony Russo, the mysterious passenger. Officer Mills stood beside a large screen. Cross walked onto the stage. "Thank you all for coming." No one spoke. Cross pointed to a timeline projected behind him. "Let's reconstruct Richard Lawson's final evening." He pointed to the first event, 7:15 p.m. He looked at Victoria. "You argued with Richard outside the casino." She nodded. "Security separated us." Cross moved down the timeline. 8:05 p.m. He looked at Damian. "You fought Richard inside the casino." Damian nodded. "Half the passengers saw it." Cross continued. 8:47 p.m. He turned to Olivia. "Your electronic keycard opened Richard's suite." Olivia shook her head. "I never used it." Cross replied, "I believe you." The room stirred. Anthony frowned. "You do?" Cross nodded. The access card entered the suite, but it never left. Silence filled the theater. Officer Mills looked surprised. What does that mean? Cross smiled slightly. It means someone wanted us to believe Olivia entered that room. He pointed to another line. 9:20 p.m. Dr. Vargas examined Richard. He refused further treatment. The doctor nodded. He insisted on leaving. Cross continued. 10:15 p.m. Anthony Russo argued with Richard in the casino office. Anthony folded his arms. That happened. 10:42 p.m. The mysterious passenger reached Richard's deck. I never entered the suite, he said. I believe that too, Cross replied. The man looked genuinely surprised. Cross walked to the final entry. 11:03 p.m. He looked at everyone. This is where the timeline breaks. Officer Mills dimmed the lights. Surveillance footage appeared on the screen. Passengers walked through the hallway. Crew members passed by. Then, nothing. The hallway was empty. For exactly 15 minutes. Cross paused the video. Everyone assumed the cameras failed. He smiled. They didn't. The room grew quiet. What? Victoria asked. Cross zoomed in on the image. The digital clock in the corner never changed. 11:03, 11:03, 11:03. It isn't frozen because the camera malfunctioned. Cross looked around the room. It's frozen because someone replaced 15 minutes of footage with a single looping image. Gasps echoed through the theater. Anthony stood. So someone erased themselves. Cross nodded. Exactly. Officer Mills held up a maintenance report. She looked at Cross. Only 3 people had authorization to access or edit security footage. Cross nodded. The captain, the head of security, and he looked directly at one suspect, the ship's information technology supervisor. The room became silent. Victoria frowned. We've never interviewed the IT supervisor. Cross answered quietly. No, because no one considered them a suspect. He closed his notebook. Until now. Every person in the theater turned toward the back of the room. The IT supervisor's chair was empty. Officer Mills' radio suddenly crackled. Detective. She listened for a moment. Her face turned pale. The IT supervisor's cabin. Cross looked at her. What about it? She swallowed. It's empty. And according to the crew, they disappeared sometime during the investigation. The theater fell completely silent. For the first time, Detective Ethan Cross wasn't looking for a suspect. He was looking for someone who had already run. And that changed the entire case.
Chapter 9: The Empty Cabin. The IT supervisor's cabin door stood open. Inside, drawers had been pulled out. The closet was empty. The bed had been stripped. Detective Ethan Cross slowly walked through the room. Someone left in a hurry, Officer Mills said. Cross shook his head. No. He opened an empty suitcase lying on the floor. They left on purpose. Mills frowned. There's a difference. Cross nodded. A hurried escape leaves mistakes. He looked around the spotless cabin. This person cleaned up before disappearing. Crime scene technicians searched every inch of the room. One called out, "Detective." Cross walked over. The technician held up a small envelope taped beneath the desk. "It's addressed to you." Cross carefully opened it. Inside was a single playing card. The ace of spades. On the back were handwritten words. "You're asking the wrong question." Officer Mills looked puzzled. "What does that mean?" Cross slipped the card into an evidence bag. "It means someone wants to play games." Hours later, Cross gathered every suspect once again in the ship's grand ballroom. No one looked comfortable. The empty chair at the end of the table represented the missing IT supervisor. Cross stood. "Our investigation has changed." Victoria Lawson folded her arms. "Because someone ran." Cross nodded. "Because someone wanted us to chase them." The room grew quiet. Cross walked to a large display showing the ship's electronic keycard logs. "I've reviewed every cabin entry." He pointed to Richard Lawson's suite. Only one authorized keycard entered. Olivia's. She immediately spoke. "I told you I never used it." "I know." Cross nodded. "Because something else entered that suite." Anthony Russo frowned. "What?" Cross held up a maintenance key. "A mechanical master key." Silence. Officer Mills looked surprised. "Those don't appear in electronic records." "Exactly," Cross replied. "They leave no digital footprint." The room buzzed with whispers. Damian Cole leaned forward. So the killer used a physical key. Cross answered carefully. Someone did. Nathan Brooks looked up. Who has those keys? The captain, head of security, maintenance, and the IT supervisor for emergency system failures. Silence settled over the ballroom. Officer Mills entered carrying another evidence folder. We recovered fingerprints. Cross opened it. From where? Richard's balcony. Everyone looked surprised. The balcony. Mills nodded. There were 2 sets. Richard's. She turned another page. And an unidentified second set. Cross looked around the room. So someone was on the balcony. Victoria frowned. But the balcony door was locked. Cross smiled. Yes, it was. He paused. When police arrived, the suspect stared at him. Cross continued. A locked door doesn't prove no one left. It only proves it was locked later. The ballroom became silent. Cross walked to the ship's blueprint. He pointed toward the outside wall. There is a maintenance ledge connecting 3 luxury suites. Officer Mills looked stunned. You mean? Cross nodded. A person could leave Richard's balcony, climb the maintenance ledge, and enter another suite without using the hallway. Anthony whispered. That's insane. Cross smiled slightly. So is murder. Just then, a uniformed officer rushed into the ballroom. Detective. Cross turned. What is it? We found the IT supervisor. Alive. Yes. Where? The officer hesitated. Locked inside one of the ship's maintenance compartments. The room exploded with questions. Cross raised a hand for silence. Who locked them in? The officer shook his head. We don't know. Cross looked at Officer Mills. The person who altered the surveillance footage. He paused. 6 inches may not be our killer after all. For the first time since boarding the cruise ship, Detective Ethan Cross realized someone had manipulated the investigation from the very beginning. And the real murderer was still sitting somewhere in the room. Chapter 10 The Final Voyage. The ship's grand ballroom was silent. Every suspect sat at the same table. Victoria Lawson, Damian Cole, Olivia Pierce, Dr. Elena Vargas, Anthony Russo, the mysterious passenger, the IT supervisor, now rescued from the maintenance compartment. Detective Ethan Cross stood at the front of the room. Officer Mills closed the doors. No one leaves until this case is finished. Cross walked toward the evidence board. For days we've been asking one question. He wrote in large letters. WHO killed Richard Lawson. He stared at it, then drew a line through it. The room watched in silence. Cross wrote another question beneath it. One, what really happened that night? Cross picked up the medical examiner's final report. Richard Lawson died from massive internal bleeding. Gasps filled the room. Victoria looked stunned. I thought he had a heart attack. Cross shook his head. No, he suffered a ruptured spleen. Officer Mills added. The injury was consistent with a heavy impact several hours before his death. Cross looked around the room. It wasn't one fatal blow. It was several impacts throughout the evening. He looked first at Victoria. You shoved him during your fight. She nodded. Cross turned to Damian. You knocked him into a blackjack table. Damian lowered his head. Cross faced Anthony. You crashed into a shelving unit. Anthony sighed. It happened. Finally, Cross looked at the mysterious passenger. You shoved him into metal deck chairs. The man answered quietly. Yes. Cross placed photographs of Richard's injuries on the table. Each confrontation caused another injury. No single fight was fatal. But together, he paused. They became deadly. The room fell silent. Dr. Vargas slowly spoke. I warned him not to leave the medical center. Cross nodded. If he had stayed, he almost certainly would have survived. Victoria whispered. So, none of us murdered him. Cross answered carefully. 3 inches. None of the evidence supports an intentional killing. Officer Mills continued. Richard ignored medical advice. He continued arguing. He continued drinking. He continued placing himself in dangerous situations. Cross nodded. And eventually, his body could take no more. Anthony looked confused. Then why was the security footage altered? Cross smiled. Because someone wanted police to believe there had been a murderer. Every eye turned toward the rescued IT supervisor. The supervisor slowly stood. I altered the footage. Silence. Cross remained calm. Why? The supervisor sighed. Because if investigators discovered the ship's surveillance system had been hacked, my career was over. So you replaced the missing footage? Yes. I thought people would blame the killer. Cross nodded. But there wasn't one. The supervisor lowered his head. No. Nathan Brooks stood. So Richard died because everyone kept confronting him. Cross answered honestly. Richard spent the entire cruise creating conflict. He ignored every warning. He refused medical treatment. And he kept walking into one confrontation after another. Cross closed the case file. His death was tragic, but based on the evidence, it was not murder. Officer Mills placed one final envelope on the table. It was found inside Richard's safe. Cross opened it. Inside was a handwritten letter. 5. He read the final paragraph aloud. If you're reading this, then I waited too long to make things right. I spent years believing I could outrun my mistakes. I was wrong. If my past catches me before I can explain everything, let the truth finally be told. Cross folded the letter. Richard Lawson had written it the day before he died. He knew his past was closing in. He simply didn't know his own body would fail first. As the suspects quietly left the ballroom, Officer Mills looked at Cross. 3 cases. No convicted killers. Cross smiled faintly. Not every mystery ends with handcuffs. He looked out across the calm ocean. Sometimes, the truth is punishment enough. Outside, the passengers disembarked, unaware of how close they had come to witnessing a murder that never was. The cruise had ended. The investigation had ended. But Detective Ethan Cross knew another case was already waiting somewhere. Another victim. Another list of suspects. Another truth hidden beneath layers of fear, lies, and coincidence.
You have been listening to Murder Mystery Crime Podcast. Be sure to subscribe so you won't miss an exciting episode. And thanks for listening.